Daniel had always known he wasn't meant for an ordinary life. Even as a teenager, he could feel it. The impatience, the quiet anger that came from watching people settle too early. He didn't hate struggle. What he hated was stagnation. The idea of waking up 10 years later in the same place terrified him more than failure ever could. In his mid-20s, Daniel was still broke, but he wasn't clueless. He freelanced, coded late into the night, learned systems most people ignored. He wasn't rich, but he was close to something. He could feel it, like pressure behind the eyes before a storm. The opportunity came from someone he barely knew. A founder Daniel had once helped for almost nothing called him one evening. Casual in tone, heavy in meaning. The company was moving fast. Investors were circling. They needed someone sharp, loyal, and willing to bleed early. The offer wasn't glamorous. Low salary, long hours, no guarantees. But there was equity, real equity. The kind that doesn't change your month. It changes your bloodline. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He paced the small apartment he shared with Maya, replaying the call over and over. He imagined the move, the grind, the risk. He imagined failure. The kind where you come back with nothing and everyone says, "I told you so." And then he imagined success. Not the flashy version, the quiet one. The kind where your name appears somewhere it wasn't supposed to. But Maya was asleep in the other room. Maya, who had been there when his bank account hit zero. In the morning, he told her. She listened carefully, asked questions, didn't interrupt. Then she said something that changed everything. "I believe in you," she said softly, "but I don't want to build a life on maybes." Daniel nodded. He told himself love was the bigger win, that opportunities came and went, but people didn't, that walking away from money for love was noble. So he called the founder back and said no. At that moment, it felt like strength. Years later, he would understand it was fear wearing a better mask. Chapter 2. The choice that felt right. At first, for a while, Daniel wore his decision like armor. Whenever doubt crept in, he reminded himself why he stayed. Maya was happier. Their life felt stable. There were no risky moves, no long-distance strain, no sleepless nights wondering if he had destroyed everything with one reckless choice. People praised him for it. Friends called him mature. Family said he had his priorities straight. Even Maya looked at him differently, like a man who had chosen commitment over ego. And Daniel wanted to believe that was enough. But life has a way of exposing lies slowly. The first crack appeared 6 months later, when Daniel saw the startup mentioned online. A small article, a funding round, nothing dramatic, just enough to notice. He closed the tab and told himself it meant nothing. Then another article appeared, then another. The company grew, quietly at first, then aggressively. New hires, bigger clients, serious investors. Daniel followed from a distance, pretending it didn't matter. At home, things changed in ways neither of them named. Money became tighter, not disastrous, just uncomfortable. Conversations shifted. They spoke less about the future and more about bills, timing, patience. Maya still loved him, that was clear, but belief began to sound different than it used to. "You're talented," she said one evening. "I just wish something would finally move." Daniel felt that sentence sink deeper than she intended. He worked harder, took safer jobs, chose reliability over risk again and again. He told himself this was what being responsible looked like, but responsibility without progress turns into resentment. Late at night, when Maya was asleep, Daniel would open his laptop and look at the company he almost joined. He imagined a version of himself in another city, exhausted but building something that mattered. He hated himself for it. Because how do you explain to the woman you love that the life you chose together is slowly suffocating you? The irony was cruel. Daniel had chosen love so he wouldn't lose her, and that choice was quietly pulling them apart. Chapter 3. When love started to feel like a weight, Daniel didn't notice the change immediately. That was the worst part. Nothing exploded, no shouting, no dramatic arguments. Life just became heavier, one small moment at a time. The bills arrived more often. The numbers stopped adding up. Daniel started doing calculations in his head before speaking. Whether they could afford a meal out, whether a delay would cause problems, whether saying next month was just another way of lying. Maya tried to be patient. She really did. But patience has a sound when it's wearing thin. It's in the pauses after questions. It's in the way someone exhales before responding. It's in the look that says, I don't want to say this, but I have to. Do you think things will be different this year? She asked one night, not accusing, just tired. Daniel said yes too quickly. He always said yes. The truth was, he didn't know anymore. Work became humiliating in ways he never talked about. Younger co-workers got promoted faster. Less capable people spoke with confidence he didn't have the luxury of faking. Daniel watched people who took risks move ahead while he stayed where he was, holding on to safety that no longer felt safe. At home, he tried to hide it, but shame leaks. He became quieter, short-tempered, defensive over small things that didn't matter. Maya noticed, even when she didn't mention it. You don't talk to me like you used to, she said one evening. Daniel wanted to scream that he didn't know how anymore. That every conversation felt like a reminder of what he hadn't become yet. Instead, he apologized. Again. Love, he was learning, doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes. Maya stopped talking about the future the way she used to. No more when we have this. Just if and maybe. She spent more time away. Daniel told himself it was normal, but deep down, he felt something ugly forming. Fear, not of losing her, but of her waking up one day and realizing she had waited too long for a man who kept promising change. The hardest part wasn't that Daniel had chosen love over money. It was realizing that choice had quietly turned him into someone Maya didn't feel safe leaning on anymore. And that realization hurt more than poverty ever could. Chapter 4. The moment he realized it was too late. Daniel found out about the startup on a random Tuesday afternoon. There was nothing special about the day. No bad feeling, no warning. He was scrolling through his phone during a short break when a familiar name caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. Then he opened the article. The company had gone public. The founder, the same man who had once asked Daniel to take a chance, was standing in front of cameras, smiling the kind of smile people wear when their life has permanently changed. Daniel stared at the screen longer than he should have. Numbers followed. Valuations, shares, early employees becoming millionaires overnight. People Daniel remembered as tired, stressed, unsure, now described as visionaries and founding minds. Daniel closed the article, opened it again, read it slowly this time. That was when it hit him. Not jealousy, not anger, regret. Heavy, suffocating regret. He did the math in his head without meaning to. What his equity would have been worth. What his life would look like if he had said yes. Where he would be standing right now if he hadn't tried so hard to be reasonable. When he got home, Maya was in the kitchen. She noticed his face immediately. What happened? She asked. Daniel hesitated, then handed her the phone. She read the article quietly, too quietly. When she looked up, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's good for them, she said. Daniel nodded. Neither of them spoke after that. The silence stretched longer than usual. It wasn't awkward, it was heavy, like both of them were thinking the same thing but didn't want to say it out loud. Later that night, Maya said something that stayed with him. I just wish, she said carefully, that things like this happened to us. She didn't accuse him, she didn't blame him, and that somehow made it worse. Daniel lay awake that night replaying the past, the phone call, the hesitation, the choice he had framed as love. For the first time, he admitted something he had been avoiding. He hadn't chosen love over money. He had chosen safety over risk, and the window had closed. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between them. Maya became distant in a way that wasn't dramatic, but final. She stopped asking when things would change, stopped encouraging, stopped believing out loud. Daniel felt her slipping away, and he didn't know how to stop it. Because how do you fix a future that already passed you by? Chapter 5. The day she stopped waiting. Maya didn't leave the way people expect breakups to happen. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no final argument that could be replayed and blamed. She simply stopped waiting. Daniel noticed it in small ways at first. She stopped asking about his day, stopped sharing hers in detail. When he talked about plans, she listened politely, like someone hearing a story they no longer believed in. She began staying out later, not suspiciously, just elsewhere, with friends, with work, with anything that made the evenings shorter. Daniel tried to fix things the only way he knew how, by trying harder. He worked longer hours, took on extra jobs, promised that things were about to change, even when he wasn't sure they would. He spoke with urgency now, like a man running after something already leaving. Maya listened. She always did. But listening isn't the same as believing. One night she sat across from him at the small kitchen table they had shared for years. The room was quiet, no TV, no distractions. That alone made Daniel nervous. "I need to say something," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, too steady. Daniel nodded, already feeling his chest tighten. "I don't think you're lazy," she continued, "and I don't think you're incapable. I just think you're stuck. And I don't know how long I'm supposed to stay here, pretending I'm okay with that." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. She wasn't wrong. "I've been waiting, Irina," Maya said. "Waiting for the break, waiting for the risk to pay off, waiting for the future you keep describing, and I'm tired of waiting." He told her he loved her. She said she knew. He told her he was trying. She said she could see that. That was the worst part. There was no villain in the room, no one to hate, just two people who wanted different things at different speeds. "I can't keep betting my life on potential," she said quietly. "I need something real." They didn't decide everything that night. They didn't have to. The decision had already been made. Over the next few weeks, she packed slowly, not angrily, thoughtfully, like someone closing a chapter they had already mourned. The day she left, Daniel helped her carry the last box to her car. They hugged for a long time. Neither of them cried. And when she drove away, Daniel stood there longer than he needed to, realizing something that hit deeper than the breakup itself. He hadn't just lost Maya. He had lost the version of himself she once believed in. Chapter 6. The point where he stopped playing it safe. Daniel expected the apartment to feel empty after Maya left. What he didn't expect was how quiet his own thoughts would become. There was no one to reassure, no one to convince, no one to promise things to anymore. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was exposing. Every excuse he had been using suddenly had nowhere to hide. For weeks, he did nothing different. He went to work, came home, ate alone, slept badly, woke up tired. The routine continued, but without the pressure of disappointing someone else. Daniel began to notice something uncomfortable. He had been lying to himself, not about effort. He had worked hard, but about courage. He had built his life around avoiding regret, and somehow still ended up drowning in it. One night, unable to sleep, Daniel opened his laptop and pulled up the same articles he used to close quickly. Companies, founders, deals, people who had taken risks he was too careful to take. This time, he didn't close the tab. He stayed up until morning reading, learning, tracing patterns, not fantasizing, studying, where the money moved, where people failed, where timing mattered more than intelligence. Something shifted. Daniel stopped asking, "What if I fail?" He started asking, "What if I stay like this?" That question scared him more. Within weeks, his behavior changed. Quietly, no announcements, no speeches about new beginnings. He cut unnecessary expenses, took contracts that scared him instead of ones that felt safe, started building something of his own in the hours no one else saw. He failed early, quickly, repeatedly, and for the first time, he didn't retreat. He lost money he couldn't afford to lose, had meetings that went nowhere, heard no more times than he could count, but every rejection sharpened him instead of shrinking him. There was no one left to impress, only himself. Months passed, then a year. Progress came slowly, not in headlines but in momentum. One client became two. One contract led to a partnership. Small wins stacked into something that finally felt solid. Daniel didn't feel happy yet, but he felt honest. He wasn't chasing Maya anymore. He wasn't chasing approval. He was chasing competence, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. Late one night, sitting alone at his desk, Daniel realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Love hadn't failed him. Fear had. And if there was one thing he refused to do again, it was let fear make his decisions for him. Chapter 7. The slow rise that no one celebrated. Daniel didn't wake up rich one morning. There was no dramatic turning point, no single deal that changed everything overnight. If anything, the rise was so quiet that most people didn't notice it happening at all. The first sign was stability. Bills stopped feeling urgent. Rent was paid early. He no longer checked his balance before buying groceries. These weren't victories he told anyone about. They were private reliefs, the kind that only matter to people who have lived without them. Work changed too. Clients stopped questioning his rates. Meetings felt different. People listened when he spoke, not because he was loud or confident, but because he knew what he was talking about now. He had scars, experience. He had failed enough times to stop guessing. Daniel hired his first employee without celebrating it, then another. He moved out of the apartment he once shared with Maya, not because he wanted something bigger, but because he needed space to breathe. Years passed like this. No applause, no sudden recognition, just quiet momentum. The company grew, then diversified, then expanded into areas Daniel had once been afraid to touch. Investors showed interest. Partners approached him. People who had never returned his calls before suddenly found time. Daniel noticed something strange. The more successful he became, the less he wanted to talk about it. There was no one to share the victories with the way he once imagined. No one waiting at home to ask how his day went. No one who knew the cost behind the progress. Success, he learned, doesn't replace what you lose. It just changes what hurts. One evening, while scrolling through his phone, Daniel saw a familiar face in an article. Maya. She had been tagged in a photo at a company event. She looked well, happy, standing beside someone new. Someone confident in a way Daniel once promised he would be. Daniel stared at the screen longer than he meant to. There was no anger, no jealousy, just a quiet understanding. Their timelines had never matched. That night, Daniel stayed late at the office. Not because he needed to, but because going home still felt strange. He looked around at what he had built, the team, the systems, the momentum, and realized something that surprised him. He had finally become the man Maya needed him to be, just not in time. And there was no version of success that could change that. Chapter 8. What he learned too late to fix. Daniel didn't think about Maya as often as he used to. That surprised him. For a long time, she had lived in his head, in quiet moments, in sleepless nights, in the space between decisions. But as his life filled up with responsibility, meetings and pressure, the memories softened. They didn't disappear. They just stopped hurting the way they once did. That's how he knew he had changed. One evening, after a long day of meetings and negotiations, Daniel sat alone in his office long after everyone else had left. The city outside his window looked the way it always had. Busy, loud, indifferent. Somewhere down there, people were making the same choices he once did, convincing themselves they had time. He thought about the man he used to be. The version of himself who believed choosing love meant sacrificing ambition. The version who thought patience could replace courage. The version who assumed the future would wait for him to feel ready. He understood now how wrong that was. Love hadn't asked him to stay small. Fear had. And fear had dressed itself up as responsibility, loyalty, and maturity. Words that sounded good enough to hide behind. Daniel had learned something uncomfortable. You don't lose people because you chase success. You lose them when you stop chasing growth and expect them to wait. If he had taken the risk earlier, maybe he and Maya would have failed anyway. Maybe the relationship wouldn't have survived the pressure, but at least the ending would have been honest. Instead, they both lived with a version of regret that never fully goes away. Daniel eventually became a billionaire. Not the loud kind, not the kind that shows up in headlines every week. The quiet kind, the kind that owns time more than things. People admired his discipline, his patience, his journey. They didn't see the cost. They didn't see the nights he sat alone in silence, realizing that success doesn't rewind time. It doesn't return people. It doesn't fix decisions made too early or too late. It just makes the truth harder to ignore. Daniel didn't regret loving Maya. He regretted believing love meant shrinking himself. That was the lesson he carried forward, into every decision, every partnership, every risk he took afterward. Because ambition delayed is not noble, and love built on fear doesn't survive pressure. Some people become billionaires by chasing money. Daniel became one by learning, too late, that the most expensive mistakes aren't financial. They're personal, and once you understand that, you stop waiting for the right time, because the right time doesn't come back. You've just witnessed another tale of struggle, power, and silent revenge. This is the Billionaire Underdog Stories, where shadows become kings. If you want to become the next billionaire, like and subscribe for more stories like this. See you on the next one.